So good morning.
Good
Please
morning.
introduce yourself, Allison. I'd love to hear about your nonprofit journey today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here. Allison Prieur. I am in Tecumseh, Ontario, Canada. So we are right across from Detroit, just outside of Windsor. And I joke that I didn't know that there were jobs outside of nonprofits. Like I just always knew that I would work in nonprofits. I volunteered growing up and did my undergrads in psychology and social work, and just automatically, like I was working in nonprofits while I was in school. So it's
Amazing.
always been a thing for me. But what I learned pretty early on, just out of my social work degree, I always knew that I would work at like community level. And I didn't really know what that meant. In social work, we call it macro. But I learned that like it was really frustrating to work in nonprofits, and that I was one of my first jobs was with a local homeless coalition. So it was a group of 40 organizations trying to end and prevent homelessness. And I was like, these people are working so hard and they cannot, like the funders and government are not listening to them about what they need to be able to make a difference and to actually like move the needle on this issue. And so I went back to school and did a master's in public policy. And I said I wanted to be able to talk to government better to help nonprofits like
So cool.
translate what they were doing. Yeah. At the time, I was really not even familiar with what my current job is, which is evaluation. I didn't know that like when I volunteered for things like building a logic model, things people hate in nonprofits, writing outcome frameworks, that was actually evaluation work that I was doing. And so we call that accidental evaluator. So over time, I moved more and more into those roles more formally. And that's when I really realized I started working for some funding organizations to try to, I call them reconnaissance missions, like to try to understand what they were looking for and to help translate what I was experiencing in my nonprofit work to them, like what some of the challenges were going to be. One example, I worked for a funder where they really like very much overestimated the tech capacity of nonprofits. And so they created all these great online tools, which were really nice, but the folks at the like most grassroots nonprofits had no capacity, like they didn't even know how to use Excel. So having this really comprehensive and like intricate online tool was not going to work for them. And so being able to try to translate some of that was really important to me. And so then I went back to school and started doing a PhD in evaluation so I can continue like to shape the way that we do evaluation so that it works better for the nonprofit organizations that we work with.
I love that. I love that. And it's so funny because I had kind of like the opposite reaction. Like when I was young, I didn't have much exposure. I didn't know people who worked in nonprofit, grew up in a very, very small town. And for me, it it was almost like a revelation when I started to go, oh my goodness. I joked to my husband at like 8 years ago when I started to get into this work and started to, be exposed more to nonprofit. And he's like, you're seeing it everywhere, right? Like I'm just talking about it because it's almost like it's that like glass shattering, how I met your mother moment where it's like once you know, you can't unknow. So if I
Yeah.
think if you grow up with that, it's so much harder, I'm sure, to not like how do you put that, cap back on to go, oh, we'll just leave this over here if you've seen it and you know it's there.
I think that's it, right? Like, especially, you're just aware of like the systemic injustices. Like, it's not right from like my perspective, a moral and ethical rightness that, people are in the situations that they're in, like our housing system, our food system. There are so many things, just like basic rights that people should have access to and that they don't. And so these nonprofits are trying to like, band-aid or like plug solutions in. And I just really felt that like there's something I can do to try to make this better. And that's where I'm at. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so tell me a little bit more, favorite part to date of your long history of working in this sector.
Mm. Um, well, I use a lot of strengths-based tools, and I think that's something I would say is my favorite part, and it's really introducing those tools to organizations to be able to take this positive view of their work. I think so often we're in this scarcity mindset. There's competition for funding, but really taking that step back and saying, like, here are the things we're doing really great, and how do we do more of that? I think it really opens people's eyes, and it gives them a sense, they're there because it's of their purpose, right? They're there because of their passion. Like people don't work in nonprofits to make millions of dollars or to like,
Sure.
you talk about this all the time, right? But so to give them, to show them and reflect back to them the positive difference that they're making in community is so powerful, I think. And it really opens people's eyes, as I said, to be able to see ways to continue doing that, ways to do more of that, ways to partner, um, to, make that impact and amplify that impact even greater. So,
One thing that, a lot of times happens in all organizations, and there's a discussion often about if you're a marketer, it's not just outward marketing, it's internal marketing. Like your own people need to have the messaging. They need to understand what you're trying to sell. Like, because they sometimes are providing the services, right? Like I've been in so many organizations where it's like, oh, here's the services we're doing on the inside. And I need that information as the marketer. But I also have to go, okay, heads up, all the stuff you're talking about, that doesn't matter to the person on the they're not using any of the same language as you. It doesn't matter. They are instead looking at like the impact of what's happening, or what's the end point. That's the goal they want to get to. All of this middle ground stuff sometimes matters to them, sometimes doesn't. But your own internal team cannot understand how you're talking to the general public. So I think that's so interesting to bring that impact back in internally, right? It's like that gathering of stats. Who did we help? How did we help them? Qualitative, I know there's so many discussions around like, it's not just quantitative data. We need like qualitative is really interesting, especially in the nonprofit world.
absolutely. And so it goes both ways, I think. And one of the things that when I'm working with nonprofits, like I try to work with organizations that have really low capacity and are like just getting started in a journey of embedding like data and evaluation into their work. And one of the first things I always suggest is talk to your staff, like bring people together, have a staff meeting and talk about what they're seeing. It can help you identify gaps,
Yeah.
so that then you can seek funding for some of those places. One of the things, I work with a group called Sustainable Livelihoods Canada, and one of the things we're always trying to help organizations do is identify like what we call the unfunded work. So
Mm,
what work are you doing that you actually have no funding for? Because there's an opportunity to potentially attract some funding to support that because you're doing it anyway. Um,
that's so cool. I hadn't even, I think this is the thing is so many of us avoid the exact conversation you're having where we're just like, oh, we just continue to do this work, right? We're just trucking along. It would be great if this was funded, but I don't even know that nonprofits taking that time and knowing what you're going to do with that time, having those challenging conversations is also a little overwhelming if you don't know what to do with it once you've had it.
Well, and it's tough too, I think, exactly that, because sometimes you're afraid, like the what you hear might be something really tricky. And so one of the things I always encourage organizations to do is really take it back and like take those small steps. You cannot solve it all in one day. So
Yeah.
figure out like, Frozen, we both have kids. Like, what's the next right thing that you can do? Like, what's the next step you can take? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that can be so powerful within organizations, but it also builds that culture of learning and using evidence. So check something out, pick one thing to do, try it out, and then like, the classic like project management plan, do study act, do that thing. So figure out how it's working, what you need to shift, and then maybe take a next step after that.
I love that. Okay, so this kind of leads in perfectly because we already started talking about challenges. But challenges that you've seen in this sector, this can be global, this can be more at a community kind of level. But what do you see often in your work?
So I think, and it really does feed into that last conversation, because I think it's an opportunity too for folks like me and like you to really learn from the direct service staff about what challenges they are experiencing. We talk a lot about burnout and think about those direct service staff and what they are feeling in those situations that they're working in, where like the system is designed to hold people back, and they're here just trying to, like I said, band-aid, plug things together, but they're going home with that. And I think Maytree Foundation does a great 5 Good Ideas series, and Farzana Doctor was someone who was on it about 5 good ideas around self-care. She's written a book about it too, but she talked about the fact that like it's normal and expected to be um, like upset by human suffering. Like this is
Yeah.
like this is like this is a normal reaction to what folks are experiencing. And when we think about like how we can kind of wrap that support around our direct service staff and make sure that, we are like, whether we're in a development role or an evaluation role, that we're really like doing the best we can to help them do the great work, because they're really the ones who are making the impact, right?
Yeah.
And so keeping their connection with program participants in a good way, and also, yeah, just keeping those feedback loops open to understand those challenges that are coming. Because the reality is, I mean, we all know, we've already said the pay in nonprofit sector is not great, but those are all systemic issues as well, right? I think that funders for a long time have relied on people coming into the nonprofit sector and supplementing their wages with their passion. And so,
Absolutely.
and the work is tough, it's hard. And so I think, we can help push to change that conversation while also recognizing what folks who are doing like the direct work are really experiencing.
Well, it's kind of been interesting because I actually, anecdotally, I'm not gathering data the way I should. We should have a conversation about that. But anecdotally, I actually find sometimes the frontline people who are doing direct delivery of services, the work is a different kind of hard, right? But they have that tighter emotional connection to being like, I did this and then this kind of happened, right? So it's a different kind of burnout happening among those individuals, but usually their passion is still very, very high because they can see what's happening. And so I think that's sometimes the challenge too of, people who are in marketing roles, fundraising roles, director development, all of those kind of roles is they're not always getting that opportunity to go out into the field or have those direct relationships. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. Sometimes it's time, it's money, it's energy, it's, if you're providing services in Africa and that's where all the program people are, you maybe are in North America doing different work. So you're not getting that opportunity. But we're really, at the individual level, I think it's very different than at the organizational level of what we would call burnout, because the burnout that's being reported at an organizational level and what I'm then hearing from people at an individual level they're not matching up very well right
Mhm.
now. And I think that's what's been interesting about some of the hot chats is like, those are different conversations when you get a one-on-one with someone to talk about this work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I love about the Hive, is that you get to meet people in so many different types of nonprofit work. And so, I mean, I've met people who do very similar work to me. I've met people who do work that is like adjacent to me, where we see some synergies that we didn't know existed before the Hive, but then also getting to meet some of those folks who are out there doing that direct service work and kind of reaffirming what I'm hearing through my work. Like, okay, yes, this is broader than just these, number of organizations that I work with, but it's something that's really kind of ubiquitous throughout the sector.
Absolutely. Yeah. The variety of organizations that I would never have heard about, that just this is what they do. And you're like, I didn't even know that this was, clearly once you hear it, you're like, oh, of course there's people who need this type of a service, right? That this is out there. And the broadness of nonprofits who are truly plugging the hole of what, I've met so many people who are providing nonprofits that are domestic violence resources for women. Well, that would have been covered a lot of the time by the government potentially in the past. And now it's like, well, there's this huge gaping hole that just there's no, if nonprofits don't step in, there's no resources or there's nothing there, or the wait list is 2.5 years in Canada to get any of the resources you might need to get into a shelter somewhere. Right. And, it's so, uh, you know, it's wonderful to know about how many nonprofits are out there providing different services. It's also really challenging to hear that almost all of them are experiencing the same problems.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so much of it, here in Canada comes from that downloading of services, like you're saying,
Yeah.
to organizations. And the rationale for it at the time was about cost savings. Well, there's only one reason that there was a cost savings. It's not because like nonprofits can do the work with fewer people or more efficiently in some way. It's because they were willing to do it cheaper, and because they bred this culture of competition that was like a race to the bottom in terms of, how low can we go in terms of our budget to be able to do this work. And that's now set us up for, in these decades really that we've had of austerity, like now we're in this situation where nobody's had wage increases. Like I could count, I've worked in so many nonprofits and there are so few that actually do like a cost of living adjustment. Folks are like legitimately like making less money now than they were a number of years ago because those funding increases haven't come, and that the work has only gotten more difficult.
Only got more difficult. Absolutely. So my next question is around peer support. How does peer support influence your work, support your work, all of those different pieces?
Good question. I don't think that I could do the work that I do without peer support. I think it takes so much feedback from other folks to be able to do this work. I had a mentor really early in my career, Cheryl Taggart, who told me, knowing that I was going into this kind of community level work, she said, always make sure you keep that connection to to the work, and that you don't get too removed from that. And so I've really carried that with me for like the past 20 years, in making sure that I have peer support at various levels. And so, working with the nonprofit leaders where I'm hearing about their challenges and their experiences, working with other folks like us who are doing the consulting, and, just throwing ideas, like that's a great group for me to be able to test things out or say, like, does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
How might I add, some of your marketing expertise into what I'm thinking about in terms of like disseminating this evaluation report, right? Like that's all so valuable. And then also, of course, being able to connect with the staff, like I said, and learning about their experiences, the challenges that they are facing, and how I can better support them through data and learning.
It's been the hype. I keep joking around where I'm like, my marketing is only getting better because I actually feel like I just get to talk to other people and go, this is what I'm seeing. Like it's almost like the opposite of an echo chamber, because sometimes I'm like I am on point and I'm like hitting this, like this marketing messaging is exactly what I needed. Or sometimes I have just gotten so bogged down at work by myself, how much of the time. And it is great for someone when I'm trying to put together like some new Hive messaging and I think that this is on point, and I'll share it with someone and they're like, well, this isn't really, this is not going to resonate for the following reasons, or you haven't thought about this from this sort of a DEI perspective, or I can't think through everything. Right. And I think we've almost been, so many people I talk to in nonprofit, like it's so solo that no wonder it kind of becomes like an echo chamber, either in your organization or in your head, because you're not getting that outside influence often enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I've come out of a Hive chat not like without an idea, like not feeling energized, not being like, oh, this is something that I want to think about or work on. It's like every single time you just learn something new, you're exposed to someone who has a different perspective, and it's so valuable.
I usually have a bunch of tabs open afterwards where I'm like,
Yeah.
now I have to, there's all these great websites, or like people will recommend books to me. I don't like, I have like 10 books already piled up that I'm like, oh no, please don't recommend the book. If it's like a short podcast, like I can maybe do that, but like no more, no more books, maybe audiobooks. I'm going to have to get into that and see if I can get my kids to listen to it with me. So you kind of jumped into this a little bit already. You've been a Hive member for quite a while, which I very much appreciate. One of our amazing sponsors, yourself. What have you gotten out of the Hive chats? Have you had like favorite conversations, things like that?
Oh, I don't think I've had a favorite conversation for sure. Like I couldn't even rank them. And that's something that I'm usually pretty good at doing, but they have all been so lovely. I think that when I think about what I've gotten out of them, like I said, it's really that energy, it's that excitement for the work, it's the camaraderie, recognizing that we're all kind of in this together, and like things can be better because we all believe it. We're all here voluntarily without any compensation or any like expectation. It's all just like showing up to meet new people, and we're all here for the same reason, and it's lovely. Like yeah.
It's funny because it's attracting certain people. And I was talking with someone about this the other day because they're like, oh, well, what do you do about, people who don't really want to talk? And I was like, well, I don't think that this is the thing for them. And that's okay. Right. Like, I don't, if this is not your jam, one-to-one conversation, that's all right. There's probably other great groups out there. There are lots of webinars. There's lots of more like group discussions. If that's not
Conversations like
like
this.
exactly right,
Yeah.
like that's okay. You don't have to do that. But the people who are joining, I think, are coming with a lot of background. They're ready to have some interesting. I've had some wild conversations that have gone down such a garden path afterwards that I'm like, oh, I feel like I just had like a little bit of a shift in my mindset on something, and that's not what I planned on doing at 8:30 on a Thursday morning. But this is where I'm at now, right? So cool.
I think that's the hardest part is then like integrating it. It's like
Right? You're
you
just
have this great conversation and then you're like, okay, now like my world has changed. So what do I do?
exactly. I've had some Thursdays where, I kind of cheat a little bit and take 3 discussions when I can on a Thursday. And my husband at dinner time is like, "You're like on fire still about all the stuff we talked about." I'm like, "This is what happens though. This is why it's like such a great day. Thursdays are so fun." Um, this is lovely. I would like to ask you, please describe exactly all that you do with your consultancy and how people can get in touch with you because I think it's such a unique offering and one I know that lots of nonprofits need.
Well, this is where like my marketing skills and lack of show because I feel like I don't have a great like pitch for it. But so basically, I work with organizations, mostly human service nonprofits. I've been saying I want them to use their data and change the world. So I try to help them often take data they already have, whether they're collecting it for funders or, like I said, staff focus groups, those kinds of things. Take really simple data and use it to improve their programs internally, but also to advocate for system change.
Nice.
And that's the kind of work that I do with organizations. And that looks very different depending on usually where their funding source is. If they have some internal funding, we can be really flexible. If it's attached to a grant, I help them maybe evaluate a specific program or something like that. But I bring in a lot of different evaluation approaches. I believe in the mixed methods like quantitative and qualitative, and really just customizing something for what an organization is trying to achieve.
I love that. That's fantastic. And your website, I'm going to put it in the comments for this YouTube video as well. But
It's DareIC, DareiC.com.
awesome. Amazing. Well, Allison, you're just a delight, as I already knew, but this was super fun. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you. It was wonderful.